All right, I think we're going to get started here. It's just after 1:45. And this is our last official session of the day, I believe, right? And we've got a great session ahead of us, all on interesting feedstocks with some urine and some dead animals. It's the best session of the day, really.
Fun things. It's supposed to be the before speaker, the before lunch speaker.
Yeah. Next time, and make sure you put that in your evaluations for next time. But all right, we're going to start with Benson. Benson works around the corner from our facility at Wasted, which is in Burlington. Oh, well, it's Wasted.
Close enough.
We call it Greater Burlington area. Benson works to reclaim nutrient resources from human waste, in parentheses, as an engineer at Wasted. In this role, Benson treats source-separated urine for use as an exceptional quality soil amendment. Benson holds an MS in chemical engineering from Worcester Polytech Institute and has experience working on small farms. So any of you who spend time in the Greater Burlington area have probably seen the big orange porta potties around, and that is Wasted, and it's a pretty cool thing going on. So we're excited to hear about more from Benson. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Benson. I've been with Wasted for about 2 years. And before that, I was working in pharmaceutical R&D. So most of this conversation today has been around recycling nutrients before people eat them or that people don't eat. Our focus is a little different. We focus on recycling nutrients after people eat them. So our vision is to catalyze circular sanitation and change the way people think about waste. When we talk about circular sanitation, that's the idea of recovering resources from human waste, from pee and poo. And we do that primarily by acting as a portable restroom operator. So we have porta potties in the Greater Burlington area and the Greater Boston, Mass area. And we're also sellers of off-grid toilets. These are a dry, urine-diverting composting toilet. But most importantly, we are fertilizer manufacturers. So in Vermont, where the regulatory landscape allows it, we collect pee from our portable toilets and we recycle that into fertilizer. Some of that fertilizer we sell online to the home and garden market, and some of it we give freely to farms while conducting research. And much of our research focus in the past couple of years has been on urine as an amendment for compost. So this business is built around the idea of pee cycling, which is to recycle urine for its nutrient value. And this makes sense for a few reasons, and to explain why, we're going to look at the law of conservation of mass down in the corner. So that's a fundamental rule in chemistry that states matter is neither created nor destroyed, it only changes form. And another way of saying that is to say that what you put into something is equal to what sticks around plus what comes out of it. So we eat a lot of food every day, but our bodies don't change very much in composition or weight every day. So most of those nutrients we consume pass through us one way or another. And urine happens to be a very rich source of those nutrients. So despite making up just 1% of the volume of wastewater, urine makes up 80% of its nitrogen, half its phosphorus, and a little over half its potassium. And in the wrong context, those nutrients can be pollutants. And that's what we see on Lake Champlain. On Lake Champlain, excess phosphorus, primarily from agricultural sources, causes eutrophication of the lakes. That's the growth of toxic algae. So agricultural sources are the biggest source of phosphorus in Lake Champlain, but that's not always the case. And on Cape Cod in Massachusetts, the biggest source for nutrient pollution is septic systems. And of the septic systems, it's mainly the urine that is causing nutrient pollution. So in the wrong places, these nutrients are pollutants, but in the right places, they can fertilize crops. And using urine as a fertilizer can help offset the need for non-renewable fertilizer production, because fertilizer as it's currently made today is not sustainable. Phosphorus is mined as rock phosphate, which is a limited resource, and some geologists estimate we have just 50 to 100 years left of phosphorus resources. Nitrogen is produced by the Haber-Bosch process, which requires the burning of natural gas, which is again a non-renewable resource. Besides being not sustainable, synthetic fertilizer production is also sensitive to global politics and global economics. About 80% of the world's phosphorus reserves are in Morocco, so we're very sensitive to what that country chooses to do with regard to phosphorus. And about 85% of the potash, or potassium mineral, in the United States comes from Canada and is now subject to tariffs. So urine as a fertilizer protects the waterways, saves natural resources, and offers a more resilient source of nutrients. I'd like to turn to a couple of fun facts to explain why urine makes such a good fertilizer. The first is that one person's pee has enough nutrients to grow the grain for a loaf of bread every day. In other terms, one person's pee can supply the nutrients to grow the food for 50 to 100% of another person's diet. So it's a rich, often untapped source of nutrients. How does Wasted collect the pee? We collect mostly from our portable toilets, where the standing urinals divert to a hidden containment system within the mixed waste tank. We then pump that out using a special pump truck with a separate tank and hose for urine only. And we also collect from a restroom trailer and from permanent outhouses. In the trailer and these outhouses, we're able to collect from both standing and sitting piers using this off-grid toilet, which we have on display at the vendor booths. So in this toilet, urine runs down the front of a conveyor belt into its own plumbing, and solids get conveyed out the back. And that urine is often plumbed to a collection tank, which we pump out and treat.
I was told that.
We're good for now. We
think we're good.
have a workaround for this session. So I think she wanted you to come check it out in general, but I think we're okay for the moment.
Okay, I'll leave this here just in different
Okay.
moment. I apologize.
Thank you. So Wasted is unique in that we're one of 2 facilities in Vermont permitted for the treatment of human urine. So we produce 3 fertilizers by a relatively simple process. First is Wee Bloom, which is a solid phosphorus-rich fertilizer. We also have pasteurized whole urine, which we call whole urine because it has the full value of nutrients in it. And we produce pasteurized phosphorus-stripped urine, which is stripped of phosphorus for use in the Champlain Valley, which is phosphorus-constrained. So treatment begins with pasteurization. We pasteurize the EPA's Part 503C biosolids rules. So it's a very rigorous standard, and it meets standards set specifically in Vermont for the treatment of urine. So that results in pasteurized whole urine, but we take it a step further and strip it of its phosphorus by adding magnesium salt. So magnesium combines with the phosphate and the ammonium that are already present in urine, and we drop out a mineral called struvite. So we wash that struvite, dry it, and process it, and we sell that as Wee Bloom. So we're the first, in the Northeast anyway, urine fertilizer available for sale. So what's left after phosphorus stripping is pasteurized phosphorus-stripped urine, and that's what we put on compost and farms in the area. So where are the nutrients in urine? Urine is primarily a source of nitrogen, and whole urine has an NPK ratio of about 0.7, 0.1, 0.25. So there's a good bit of potassium there as well. And phosphorus-stripped urine has virtually no phosphorus at 0.7, 0.01, 0.25. Now the nitrogen in urine is present primarily as ammonia or ammonium, although when it leaves your body, the nitrogen is as the form urea. So native bacteria and enzymes convert that urea into ammonia over the course of hours or days, and that causes some difficulty in urine recycling because ammonia smells. A lot of farmers don't want to deal with that, and ammonia can be lost in the environment. It evaporates in the air. In addition to the big nutrients, urine is a source of micronutrients, and it contains some boron, calcium, copper, iron, magnesium, sulfur, and zinc. Those are in pretty low portions, but sulfur is somewhat significant. So to ensure we're producing a safe fertilizer and to comply with some regulatory requirements, we routinely test for contaminants. So one of the big contaminants we look for, or class of contaminants, is PFAS, which are hot topic organic recycling, especially in the recycling of biosolids. So last year we tested for 24 PFAS. We measured non-detect for all 24 of 24. More recently, we tested for 40 compounds, and we measured non-detect for 38 of 40. What did measure detectable was PFBA, and that's not too surprising. That's a short-chain PFAS, which means it's more readily passed through the body, and it's either found in food packaging or is a breakdown product of PFAS that are contained in food packaging. Although we did measure positive detect, we're not too concerned about the levels, because the PFBA in urine was still 100 times less than the limit for drinking water in Minnesota. Now we're going off Minnesota's standard because these things aren't standardized yet. There's no limit in Vermont on PFBA in drinking water. In addition to PFAS, we measure for pathogens, We test twice a year for fecal coliform, which is a pathogen indicator. And every time we've tested, we've measured non-detect for fecal coliform, which means the pasteurization process is working. And lastly, we test for heavy metals. And heavy metals in urine have come back at least 2 orders of magnitude or 100 times less than the limit that's set for us in the state of Vermont. So between PFAS, heavy metals, and pathogens, we feel we're producing a safe fertilizer. So we're interested in urine as an input for compost. We hypothesized that carbon-rich compost could benefit from the added nitrogen of urine. So last year we took a large leaf litter compost windrow and we divided it in 2. One daughter pile saw an amendment of urine, and one daughter pile saw no treatment at all. So these compost piles were pretty large, about 20 to 25 yards, and we studied them over the course of the season. So to apply urine to compost, we had to build a specialized spreader. As I'm sure some of you are aware, it can be difficult to add liquid amendments to compost. It's much easier to add solids to solids. So to apply urine to compost, we just hung a boom off an IBC tote and used that to gravity drain urine onto the pile. Now this worked well enough for the season, but there are a few drawbacks. And the biggest one was that it required farmer time and an operator at least to man the tractor. So this gravity drained pretty slowly and that had to be an operator there the whole time. Additionally, the tractor had to drive into the pile and that required it to be cleaned afterwards. So we're working on some improvements for this next iteration. Over the course of this experiment, we were most concerned about moisture because we're adding a lot of urine to compost, which adds a lot of water. We were worried that the compost pile could be starved of oxygen. So the piles began around the same moisture content, about 65% at the start of the experiment. The addition of urine bumped the moisture content up to about 70%. But by the experiment's close in mid-November, the moisture contents matched, which led us to believe that urine application at this rate was not a hindrance to the pile. We also looked at temperature over the course of the experiment. The control and experimental piles measured similarly at 105 at the end of September, but by mid-November, the experimental pile measured about 100 Fahrenheit versus 85 for the control, leading us to believe that the experimental pile and the amendment of urine resulted in a more active composting process near the end of the experiment. So of the nutrients we studied, we were most interested in nitrogen because urine is primarily a nitrogen amendment. So we added about 27 pounds of nitrogen to the pile, which is a pretty significant portion. That's about 0.5% of the pile's initial dry weight, or about 56% of its initial nitrogen concentration. Now, despite this huge addition of nitrogen, it is inconclusive whether this amendment increased the overall nitrogen concentration and the overall weight of nitrogen in the pile, and that could be due to inefficiencies in the application. So some urine ran off the pile, which was apparent because the grass around the pile had been burned. Additionally, some nitrogen may have been lost in the form of ammonia because that ammonia volatilizes. Now, while it's unclear whether total nitrogen increased, we did see an increase in nitrate nitrogen. So we saw a gain of about 3 to 4 pounds in the experimental pile versus a gain of just 0.2 to 0.3 pounds in the control pile. And that difference we're going to attribute to the nitrification and aerobic conditions of the ammonium in urine. So ammonia can become nitrate when it's decomposed aerobically. In addition to nitrogen, we looked at potassium. We added about 10.5 pounds of potassium to the experimental pile, which is a small portion of the pile's initial dry weight, but is a big portion of the pile's initial potassium content. So here we saw increases in both the concentration of potassium in the pile and the overall weight of potassium in the pile. We saw a gain of about 1 to 4 pounds in the experimental pile versus a net loss in the control pile. So this 2024 trial showed us that urine amendment at 26 gallons per cubic yard can improve nitrate nitrogen and potassium content. We also saw that despite this added liquid, the piles matched moisture content, and at the end of the trial, the experimental pile had greater temperature, suggesting greater activity. Now, we've taken these learnings from this past season and are building some improvements into this current experiment. We're targeting an application rate of 78 gallons per cubic yard, which is 3 times the application rate of this past season. So we're hoping to see now an increase in nitrogen concentration on the whole. Additionally, we're applying using a pumped spreader. So rather than gravity draining, we're pumping urine onto the pile. And that allows our company to do the work of application rather than requiring the help of a tractor and a farmer. Additionally, the piles are on a slab, and that's hopefully going to reduce some of these concerns of runoff and run through. And lastly, we'd like to incorporate some microbial analysis, enlisting the help of John Culpepper, who will be speaking a little later today. So in conclusion, urine is a local, sustainable, and resilient source of nutrients. And by using urine in agriculture, you keep nutrients in communities, you protect waterways, and you offset the need for non-renewable fertilizers. We're always looking for partners for collaboration, and we're particularly interested in someone willing to create a compost amendment with us. So please feel free to reach out to me with any questions or for any interest in collaboration. Thank you.
And we have plenty of time for questions, so if folks have any questions, have at it. And I've got a couple, but I'll let the folks go first.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering about pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, so we've not done any studies ourselves, but there's a nonprofit in southern Vermont called the Rich Earth Institute, and they study this pretty extensively. What's appeared most frequently in urine, or in greatest concentrations, is caffeine and acetaminophen. And even so, you would have to eat 1 pound of urine-fertilized lettuce every day for 1,000 years to ingest the equivalent of 1 cup of coffee. So we're aware of these things and we're paying close attention to them. We might incorporate filtration later on, but based on what we know, we're not too concerned about pharmaceuticals in urine. Yeah.
How quickly do you have to use it, like apply it, or like will it get smelly, or?
It gets smelly pretty quick, on the order of days, but we've stored it for as long as a year before applying it. What's somewhat important there is to make sure the container is sealed so that you don't lose that nitrogen as evaporating ammonia.
So the nutrients stay in it?
The nutrients stay there, yep. Yeah.
How are you using the granule?
The solid fertilizer?
The little packet,
Yeah, we're not applying that to farms ourselves, but we're giving that and selling that to the home and garden market.
Would they use it in a spreader of sorts, or how?
More of a sprinkle situation. You just need 1 teaspoon per square foot, so that's fine enough for a home gardener to spread in their garden.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where is it available?
The fertilizer, you can find it at notwasted.earth, or I'm selling some at the vendor booth over in the other room.
No brick and mortar stores that are carrying it?
Not yet. No, we're hoping to get it in some.
Or
I guess there's a couple of farm stores down in Massachusetts, but it's not very widespread yet. Yeah.
I thought I saw you could buy it online. Is
Yep,
that
you
true?
can. Yep. Notwasted.earth, because the idea is nothing is wasted here.
Another question. If it's not trade secret, I'm curious generally what the pasteurization process is like.
So that's about 80 Celsius for about 90 seconds. Now the machine's somewhat smart. It tunes itself depending on the temperature to match the necessary time requirement. But those are the standards. And it's a pretty cleverly built device because ammonia is lost at higher temperatures. It's off-gassed and recycled back into a tank where it recondenses, so we don't lose nitrogen that way. There's also a heat exchanger in there, so that hot urine coming out is used to preheat cold urine coming in. So it's a pretty cool device, and that was built for us by Brightwater Tools, which is a spin-off of that nonprofit Rich Earth in southern Vermont.
Wow.
Yeah. Anything else?
What are the rules for like applying? How does it compare with biosolids, or is it similar in Vermont, like in terms of?
So we have similar reporting requirements.
Yeah.
We report to the state quarterly what we apply and where. But the requirements we set specifically for urine include a regimen of tests that parallel biosolids but are somewhat different measurements. And it is a permitted soil amendment, so it's considered a soil amendment, good for application to agriculture.
All right, another question I have.
I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. On your addition to your yard waste piles, it looks like those are pretty heavy leaf piles. I'm just curious. It looks like a lot of liquid that you're trying to force in there. And
It is, and that's what we're most concerned about.
Yeah.
So we're trying to space the applications this year to let the pile dry between applications. We're not just putting 78 gallons per yard all at once. So we're applying once a month for 8 months. We're also covering the experimental pile. so that the urine hopefully has a chance to evaporate and allow rainwater to run off. But we're also interested in concentrating urine. So the Brightwater team offers a concentrator that can increase the concentration to about 3% nitrogen. And that'd be a much lower waterway to put urine on compost.
I was curious if there was another way to increase the absorbency of the pile and still have it like higher on the carbon end of things with more fine material or something
Yep.
that would.
Perhaps wood pellets, and that's something I think John will speak to later.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yep.
What I found, I've had to deal with large quantities of dry ingredients that needed to have the moisture content
Yep.
increased. And I found the best way, and I tried so many different methods, drip tubes, and I found it would just, the water just channels.
Oh, yeah.
The best way, and it's an investment, but is to add it while you're turning. So
Yep, that's
with
what
a
we
compost
intend to do.
turner that's outfitted with a watering manifold, it's
Okay, that's good to know. Thank
really
you.
helpful.
Yep.
I have a site in Charlotte.
Yep.
You're welcome to come see
Oh,
it,
great.
how that works.
Thank you.
Actually, I haven't had to add moisture, but you can see the watering manifold.
Yeah.
But
Although we don't apply as we're turning, we tend to turn right after to try to reincorporate everything and reduce some of those losses.
that's it, yeah,
Yeah.
another way, for sure.
All right.
Any other last questions? I would also love to chat more about coming to our site at some point.
All right. Thank
Compare
you
notes.
all.
Thank you, Benson. All right, next up we have some technology swaps here. Let you guys swap the plugs. We'll introduce John.
So, do you want me to
I
just
think,
plug my computer?
yeah, I think that's
Okay.
most straightforward.
And if you don't mind, I'm gonna put my chair
Yeah, yeah.
over here and sit.
Let me move it. So John Culpepper is co-founder of Compost for Good across the lake from us in Chittenden County. They were founded to help communities around the world to upcycle all appropriate organic materials to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, keep resources in local communities, create business opportunities, build healthy soils, sequester carbon, help solve water quality issues, and lower the cost of food and fiber production. John has worked in education, farming, facilities management, research, and more. Recently, John has been working in the ecological sanitation area and has developed a safe and efficient high-temperature composting regime to turn diverted human urine into high-value compost. And if you are ready.
And I am not.
Okay, yeah, split screen's not doing this. Oh, look at that, they've got that one out.
Yeah, and I just lost my presentation, so I'm gonna have to find that. No, that's Benson's. Okay, just a second.
Oh, so you're on.
Here we go. So, that'll work, right?
I think so, yeah, if you do presentation,
Presentation.
can you go to?
Oh, yeah.
You must be about fun as a teacher, because you're one smile after
There we go.
There we go. I tried.
It's, I think, important to know that composting human urine is, nobody in the world's doing it. I mean, we and Benson's group are, as far as I know, and a little bit done down at Cornell, is about the only research folks doing this kind of work. So still very early stages. So we are Compost for Good, 3 individuals. We like to call ourselves an initiative. We're not a company, we're not a not-for-profit. We partner with other not-for-profits in the Adirondacks, but we also work with folks from all over. While our focus is mostly in New York State, we work with people from all over the world. What we're doing with urine is just a sliver of what we do. I mean, out of the 3 of us, I'm the only one working in urine. So the presentation today is something I'm passionate about, but it's not a primary focus of Compost for Good. So Benson's already sort of described what diverted human urine is. It's important to know this is not something that we're taking from wastewater treatment plants, but rather urine diverted right at the source. So also Benson has shown you some of the more sophisticated ways to collect urine diverting toilets and things like that. But I've collected over 2,000 gallons of urine in really simple systems like this right here. Just a urinal screwed into a 5-gallon container. That, by the way, you can buy at the Rich Earth Institute in Brattleboro. So most of the plant nutrients that are found, or that we excrete, are found in urine, as Benson pointed out. Urine is really straightforward and easy to divert, store, transport, and generally speaking, to process. It can be mixed with other nitrogenous materials to improve the composting process. I'm sorry to be sitting. I just had my 24th orthopedic surgery and I can barely stand, so my apologies. So I want to describe what I think is the interesting work that we're doing with urine. Most researchers are extracting elements like nitrogen and phosphorus directly from urine, which is fantastic. What Benson's doing, what Rich Earth is doing is all fantastic. But what it ignores is the fact that organic matter in soils has been decreasing worldwide in most all production soils. Whereas what we're doing is we're actually we're using the urine as a nitrogenous feedstock. So we're not using it for the water involved in it. We're using it just like we would consider it like a really, really sloppy food scraps, for example. Might be one way to look at it. We've had a success with a variety of different composting technologies, from static piles to we've run the recipe that I've developed through a 20-foot by 4-foot diameter rotating drum composter. We've used static drum composters. We've used our new neighborhood scale composting systems that we've developed. It's another thing that we do. We develop composting equipment. And if we were a business, we'd be the worst business in the world, because what we do is develop intellectual property and we give it away. Dumb. But that's what we do. A number of advantages, whereas the urine that Benson's crew uses, they pasteurize that in a machine very elegantly. 90 seconds, you said, Benson, something
Just
like that?
about.
We do the same thing, but it takes longer. We use the composting high temperature thermophilic process to pasteurize that urine. And back to the organic matter in soils, that's one of the beauties of what we're doing, is not only are we capturing and stabilizing all of the plant nutrients that are found in urine, we're using that urine to make stable humic acids, stable organic materials. I had a brilliant thought that just evaporated out of my brain. It'll come back at an inappropriate time, no doubt. So we reach also the same biosolids requirements that Benson's process does. And so what we're really doing, what we're really in the process of doing, is not producing compost, but we're producing the trillions of microbes that are so important for good soil development. So I'm going to get into that right now. So biologically diverse compost contains what we call functional groups. These are aerobic beneficial microbes, and bacteria is one. most all of us know bacteria. This is all of these slides I produced. This is bacteria at 400 magnification, and this is what most of the soils that I look at in New York and elsewhere, that's what most of the soils look like, is highly bacterially dominant soils, which is great. Nothing wrong with bacteria. Bacteria is very important for beneficial soils. But you need other things, and I'll explain why. We're also producing fungi in millions and billions of fungal spores. We're producing protozoa, lots of different kinds of protozoa. By the way, in a teaspoon of good soil, there may be 1 billion bacterium, but in a teaspoon of soil, there might be 75,000 different species of bacteria. That blows my hair back. 75,000 different species. So if any soil biologist, soil scientist tells you that they know everything about soil, they're full of bull, because you cannot know what's happening with all of these different species. Many of the species haven't been really described yet.
I think they say only 10%.
Probably so, and maybe
Described.
we'll learn less
There's
than
more
that.
biodiversity in soil than any other place on Earth.
Yes, we know more about the moon than we do about soils in some ways. Actinobacteria we produce. Nematodes gotten a lot of bad rap. Beneficial nematodes are very, very important for healthy soils. Arthropods, these are under the microscope, they're shockingly big, but of course they're too small to really even see. So I want to talk about what these microbes do. One of the things that they do as they interact among themselves, that is the functional groups as they interact among themselves, is they aggregate soil. So bacteria and fungi, bacteria primarily produce glues that will glue bits together, bits of minerals, bits of themselves, bits of organic matter, and they make what we call microaggregates. And then fungi come along and they start producing these hyphae that bind these micro aggregates into what we call macro aggregates. And that's what develops, that's how you develop pore space in soils. So develop more pore space, you suddenly have more water holding capacity, more cation exchange capacity, more faster percolation rates, so that during rain events, water not only water goes through the soil instead of running over the soil. Nutrient cycling, really important. These bacteria and fungi, bacteria and fungi both will eat clay particles. When I say eat, what I mean is they solubilize nutrients that are contained in clays, silt, and sands. And so they can literally liberate the plant nutrients out of these things. So there are some researchers who say that there are no soils on Earth that won't produce crops for 1,000 years. It's just a matter of liberating the nutrients that are in those soils. Now that's a little hard for me to believe, but the point I think is that most of the soils, most of the reason why we're adding all these additional amendments to soils is because we don't have the biology in the soils to have this natural nutrient cycling going on. So bacteria, fungi eat mineral particles and themselves and others, and then it's the other functional groups, the protozoa, the nematodes, and other things that come along, and they eat bacteria and fungi, and then they liberate all of the nitrogen, for example, potassium, for example, out of those simpler, lower order trophic organisms. Does that make sense? I feel like what I just said didn't make a bit of sense, but good, okay. So this is natural nutrient cycling, and if done well, then you can reduce or eliminate inputs like fertilizers. And because you produce healthier soils, you can reduce or eliminate pesticides. Because you're increasing pore space, you can reduce or eliminate irrigation. So all of those things have cost to a farmer or to a land manager. Oh, well, I just said all that, didn't I? I don't really like to use the term poorly made compost. All compost is good, but in terms of organic matter. And organic matter is important, but if we can improve upon our composting systems to increase the beneficial microbiology in those composts, then we're doing our soils a big, big favor. And so, particularly working close to Lake Champlain or in Lake Champlain's watersheds, really important to think about how we reduce erosion, how we increase soil health to prevent not only nutrients from entering Lake Champlain, but also sediments and other things as well. Rooting depth. Most agricultural soils that I look at, the rooting depth based on a soil penetrometer, a tool that you can use to see what the bulk density of soils are like. Most soils, or many soils, have a rooting depth of 6 inches, 4 inches. You go out Midwest where the tall grass prairies are, and you've got soils that are, 10 feet deep, 20 feet deep, 30 feet deep. No reason why we can't develop, maybe not 30-foot deep soils here or in New York, but certainly greater than 6 inches. So who might be interested in this? Well, you could probably imagine this on your own, but anyone interested in reducing carbon footprints or reducing ecological damage from conventional forms of land management and human waste management. Phosphorus, Benson did a great job of laying out why. You've heard of peak oil. Well, it won't be long before we hit peak phosphorus, and that's going to be huge. A lot of different ways we can do this. We can rely more on the phosphorus that we're producing in our own urine, or we can create better soils that naturally cycle phosphorus, or both. A big thing in developing community is by these processes, if it would be hard to scale these processes up, right? Nobody's going to take a truck and drive urine 100 miles or 500 miles. It's not worth it. But if you think about vertically scaling, if that's a term, having lots of processing facilities in an area, in a region, then you can create lots of local jobs this way. And of course, reducing input costs for farms, golf courses, parks, you name it. And I don't have any data to support this, but my gut tells me that by capturing urine at the source and not sending that urine into the wastewater treatment plant, you can increase the life of those wastewater treatment plants. I don't know about you, but every time I pick up the paper, it seems like somebody's having to expand a wastewater treatment plant or build a new one. These things are super expensive to build and maintain over time. So increasing the life of a wastewater treatment plant, if this will allow us to do that, pretty significant. Highlights for our research. We've got the first registered research facility for processing urine in the state of New York, and I think other than Vermont, also the first anywhere else. I'm currently experimenting with a lot of feedstocks. In other words, I've got a recipe worked out that'll work every time composting diverted human urine with densified wood pellets. These are the same kind of pellets that you burn in a pellet stove. So I can produce really high value compost with just those two ingredients. And if anybody's bold enough to stick their nose in one of these bags, I think you'll find that you'll be surprised at what these bags are. This compost is made from urine and pellets. That's sort of a standalone recipe, and with that recipe, then I add food scraps with wood chips, or brewery mash, or animal bedding. So I've experimented with a lot of these other nitrogenous feedstocks, and in every single case, I reach high temperatures, 145, 150, 155 degrees Fahrenheit for an extended amount of time. So the process works, and I haven't had a failed. I've had one failed experiment, and that was with an ASP system that I was pumping too much air through, so I know why I failed there. We processed over 2,000 gallons of urine, and we've collected every milliliter of that 2,000 gallons with homemade collection devices like I showed you. So it doesn't have to be sophisticated, although it's nice to have urine diverting toilets. We've made many, many cubic yards of this high value compost. We feel like our process is safe, efficient, reaches temperatures required by the US EPA, and really importantly, produces, at least in every experiment to date, all of the major functional groups in the right sort of proportions that good, healthy soils need. That is to say, functional groups, microbiological functional groups. Applying compost made from urine can be done in lots of different ways. You're familiar with manure spreaders, you can do it that way. But you can also extract the microbiology from good compost through extractors, and then you can take that extracted material and you can feed it and make it into a compost tea. So this compost extract is simply the microbes that are kind of agitated out of compost for, it doesn't take long, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. But if you want to turn it into compost tea, that's more complicated, it takes more time, and it's a little trickier to do. But it's being done in other parts of the world by the tens of thousands of gallons. I mean, there are farms in South Africa, Australia, that are making compost extract by the tens of thousands of gallons. And as you know, farmers don't typically spend money on unproven practices. They're pretty conservative group. I can certainly imagine a time when new housing projects, building projects come together, and architects, engineers, code officials, they're all on board, and they're all incorporating sustainability into their practices. Ecological sanitation is certainly an important part of that sustainability mix. And I can see, I can see it in my head right now, so easily. Trucks in the future, 5 years, 10 years, I don't know how many years, going down the road, carrying diverted urine to a processing facility, not far, somewhere close by, and making high-value compost. lawn. Nothing wrong with Kim lawn, but I can imagine a time when there are trucks going into your neighborhood that are doing custom applications of compost extract, incorporating these microbes into your lawns and reducing the amount of inputs that you have to worry about. Speaking of adding value, how am I doing on time?
You're good.
Okay. Speaking of value, I just want to point this out. I've got there's a company out in California making compost for farmers called Catalyst Bioamendments. They're selling a cubic foot of compost for $200. That'll blow you away, Trevor. I've got a colleague of mine down in Saratoga Springs selling the same volume, 1 cubic foot, for $20. Why $20 as opposed to $200? Well, the folks out in California are making demonstrably, I mean, they can show you through their own microscopy that they're making compost that have the right kinds of microbiology for the crops that farmers are growing. So again, farmers out there in California don't tend to spend money on unproven technologies. So are we going to see a time in Vermont or New York where we sell a cubic foot? And by the way, Catalyst Bioamendments aren't selling to farmers cubic feet. They're selling, cubic yards, but they're turning that into, they're either using that material as an inoculant for the farmer's own compost operations, or they're using that compost made by Catalyst Bioamendments as to extract, making extracts from. So that's enough for me.
Thank you, John. I think we have time for questions now. We will also maybe have time at the end for follow-up questions for anyone, but Steve?
Yeah, it's not so much a question, but just an observation. For some perspective on this, the work that Catalyst Bioamendments is doing, they're doing some great work. It may be, I don't know for sure, but I've kind of looked at their operation, and I think the quantities they're selling are pretty small, and their market, I could be wrong, is mostly cannabis growers, really a high value crop, and kind of specialized. Again, not to say anything. I bought some because I couldn't believe it. I was like, okay, what does this look like? I was really surprised at how, and again, this isn't a value judgment, it's just kind of curious, how, have you seen it? Have you seen their compost?
I have not.
Come out.
I haven't analyzed it.
Forked out the $200?
No.
When I bought it, I think it was like 130 or something, but it was like, I just have to see, I still have it. I kept it. And how much, how rough it, what's the word? The particle size was, there was very large particles.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think they're using a lot of woody material, and it's fascinating, and they're obviously, they've created a community. One thing I really thinking about community here, they told me that they will only sell to customers who have their own microscope.
Is that true?
That's what they told me, because, and then
She does her own microscopy.
I know she does, but they want people to understand what they're buying and verify it themselves by looking at a microscope. And they've actually, they have their community send photographs from, because you can attach a camera to these microscopes pretty easy. And people send them, photographs of their, not just the compost they're buying, but also the soils after they apply this. So there's a lot to be said for the microbial benefits of compost, and for people that think they can sell compost for $200 a yard, it's going to be fairly unusual. But anyway, just perspective.
Yeah, my point is you can add value to compost.
Absolutely.
In a lot of different ways. This is one way. Again, we'll probably never see compost selling for that much. But one of the things you brought up, interesting to me, is I used to think that I could tell you, just like that, from smelling, feeling a sample of compost, how good it was. That's all out the window. You cannot. You have to look at it under a microscope. And some of the stuff that I analyze, and I've done countless analyses, some of the rough compost that I look at is actually, more biologically robust than some of the finer stuff. Now, of course, you don't want to be putting a lot of carbon into your soil. That's a different problem. But you can't tell by looking at it. That's the point. You have to really analyze it.
You know, what you just said jogged my memories. The work I've done, pre-sieving or not, I found a lot of the biocontrols were actually in those clumps.
Yeah.
And if I sieved it too much, I got rid of that.
Yeah.
So, it's back to whoever was talking about the aggregates, I think.
Yeah.
Any other questions for John? All right, another round of applause. Really grateful for this session. We, as we talk about organics management in Vermont and beyond, like so easily we ignore everything that gets flushed down a toilet, and yet it is such a huge part of the organics picture. And there are conferences that are wholly dedicated to biosolids and sludge and all these things that nobody wants to deal with and are full of problems because of all the other stuff that gets flushed down waterways. But in the ideal world, like in my vision, some days that we aren't throwing away all of these resources because it's such obviously historically we didn't waste them, and they create such a problem for us in our current environments that we're mining resources everywhere. So we're pretty lucky, again, in the Northeast that we have folks right in our backyards, all around us, working on these issues and figuring out what works best. And I'm very excited for what's to come in the coming years. Speaking of local expertise, we are also very lucky in the Northeast to have Jean Bonatal, who comes to us from Cornell, who I'm going to read the bio. It doesn't say on here expert, but Jean is an expert on animal mortality composting and is shipped all over the country and beyond, I think all over the world,
We work all over the world.
internationally. And if there are a lot of dead animals somewhere, Jean's one of the people they call to come figure it out, because she's got a lot of knowledge and many years of expertise on this.
And Northeast Air did the first documentation of what we were doing, so we could get it out. We tagged it onto a manure, because I said, we're never going to get money for this again. And we're always begging for a living, so.
So from Cornell, Cornell's Waste Management Institute, again, just across the lake in upstate New York. Since 1990, when many others had lost their ability to render all livestock and butcher waste, CMWMI, the acronym, developed a simple method to compost dead stock of all sizes, birds to cows to whales. Cornell APHIS has developed resources, conducted research, extension, implementation programs in the US and internationally. Also, much of the NOR work that is being done, and I hope we can hear a little bit about this. I don't know if that's in there.
Did I put that on there?
Somebody did. It's based on, so that's like it's not supposed to be a focal point of this.
Next year.
But we'll see.
We'll have more information next year.
But the human composting that is piquing lots of curiosity in the country. We have a lot out west, but a little bit in Vermont where we have legislation, and increasingly in
New York
states. In New York, new legislation. And
We have 12 states.
just a matter of time. It will
So,
be commonplace
yeah.
that when we go to our funerals for our loved ones, there will be hopefully a pile of compost returning that we can bring to our gardens.
We have, you can finish with that. We have 12 states that are, I'll just start with just a very quick overview. 12 states that have laws on the books to be able to do it. We have 2 states that actually have humans in some kind of a containment that are composting, and 2 in Germany. So that is the extent of what's happening in the world. We have people from all over the world coming in and saying, can we do this too? And there's a group called Terracon in the Northwest. It's a conference called Terracon. It's only in its 2nd year. And I worked my way in the first year and then spoke this year. And I've been working with the people that are composting because they've got questions about things. And one of the reasons I was dragged into this by the Germans and by the Northwest was because I've been composting dead stock since 1980. Somewhere in
And at the end of the
a long
day,
time.
not a whole lot of difference between one of us and a cow, other than the number of gold fillings and.
And I'm working the process out for New York right now, and we did a 220-pound bear. So that was pretty darn close to us. And the fat content, that all works, because that's one of the harder things to compost, is the fat. It renders, just like it would with a pig or anybody else, and you can get those tallowy smells.
Yep.
So,
In any case,
But anyway.
give Gene a warm welcome.
I'm not supposed to talk about That's not what they told me. But we'll see what we can do here. Anyhow, so we compost all kinds of things, and this one is primarily going to be on composting liquids. So we do all kinds of liquids, and honestly, Vermont started it out. So the Intervale compost used to compost, and I know they aren't where they were at that point and all that stuff, but they used to compost 15,000 gallons of Ben and Jerry's waste in their windrows, and they'd put it in the leaf and yard waste.
Just want to interrupt, Norm.
Correct me,
Used to be
please.
the person who did that.
Yes, and we knew I'm sorry,
That's Norm was the operator
Yeah.
outside at the Intervale who would compost.
who was doing all that. So really, I started thinking about that back then. We documented it in some of our videos because we have videos on, on food waste and manure waste and all different species, for at least 4 or 5 different species composting. So thank you. You are the inspiration for all of this work, and it's gone a long way from there. But and I do have a picture of it in some of the slides. But do we have a clicker?
No
Or
clicker,
just hit?
sorry, yes.
Okay. When we're composting anything that's liquid, any semi-solids, think about coagulated things, gels, gelatins, gel caps, all that kind of stuff. We need to have a really good source of carbon. And I think in Intervale, mostly those windrows were
Horse manure.
leaves and horse manure. And that was all to refurb the Intervale farm. And you probably could give me an update on what's happening since then. I think Ben and Jerry's stuff goes to a digester from what I could see. So they've got some digesters that we actually tested some of the stuff from those digesters not too long ago with Brian Drose's group. But anyway, carbon's really important in all of this stuff. Really fine carbon, sawdust, pretty worthless. Doesn't breathe, doesn't have aggregate, there's no aggregation. So I'm a huge proponent of a good municipal wood chip. I don't really like shavings that much. They are okay when they're mixed with other things. Tub grindings actually work quite well for a lot of materials. However, it doesn't make a good compost product afterwards. So a lot of times when we're trying to deal with dead stock, we are just processing it above ground to kill pathogens. That's basically viruses, pathogens, spore formers, all that kind of stuff. That's really the goal there. And to the point where, and I'll give you this story because I know you guys can handle it better than others might be able to, is USDA APHIS. I deal with a lot of the high path avian influenza work. So USDA APHIS has said that all we really need to do is kill the virus, and then we're done. And we could have 100 acres of windrows of dead birds, eggs, manure, all this stuff, and they're saying, well, we don't need to deal with it anymore. So we had to sort of work them through that a little bit. But we can compost all of those mediums in a month. We can get it to a safe point in a month with chickens. Turkeys a little bit longer because they're bigger and stuff like that, but we can make that process work. But we really are looking, and we said, you know, you really have to, this stuff has to be reused, it has to be recirculated. And all of our poultry manure really grows a lot of our vegetables in the Northeast. A lot of us are getting poultry manure, the larger farms definitely get poultry manure, and we've got them all across, you know, the Northeast. I don't know where Vermont's are actually, and I do spend a fair bit of time here.
A lot of it's coming from across the lake now.
From Giroux.
Upstate New York, yeah.
So Giroux, okay, so that's where yours are coming from. So we get the pollution part,
Right.
and you get the eggs. I got it now, but yes, Giroux and Crayers and all those all the way across, and are making, you know, great compost for us to grow vegetables. So we do need to make sure all this stuff is being managed and then used. And that's an important thing. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go all throughout the talk. This is actually a turkey farm that broke. That's turkey manure. And I don't know if you can see, but I'm standing on top of that pile. It was 160 degrees and it wasn't that warm in North Dakota when we were doing this work. And I said, you know, what they had to compost the turkeys was sunflower seed hull. So that's what they were using for bedding, for litter. So I said, well, I don't know if this is going to work. Well, it worked beautifully because the sunflower hull actually holds its shape and the air can circulate all around. So it really worked well. But we also went ahead and said, okay, you guys have this huge pile of manure out there. Let's get that in the mix so that we can heat these piles up really quickly. Some states have encouraged that for biosolids as well. It downgrades the whole biosolid then. It downgrades the whole compost, I mean, at that point, if you're doing that. But with a manure, it's in pretty good shape. They know what drugs are being used. They know all of those things that might come through that. So we were able to use some of that hot manure, and we encourage, like all of our farmers in New York State have experienced composting, because stuff like this is going to happen, the high path avian influenza stuff, and we just have to be prepared. So we're working towards the dairy people doing the same thing, and in New York we do, in New York, Vermont, and Maine, Pennsylvania, the whole Northeast there has funded several educational efforts in our states, and we've done courses in the states for farmers to be able to be composting their dead stock, because we need to. Okay. Basically, we're preparing a base. It may be a flat base if it's depending on what we're doing. If we're just putting chickens on it, if we're just putting dead stock on it, that might be. If not, we may have some kind of a bowl-shaped thing. And we call them volcanoes generally. That's just a very shallow one. That was Day of the Dead in New Mexico. Day of the Dead Festival in New Mexico, and they had a whole lot of sheep guts that needed to be composted. And I was down there for some other work, and I said, sure, I'll go on to the reservation and we'll get that done. So we did that, and that was the base that we used for that. So we just sort of plop the stuff in, cover it up, make that Twinkie. These are all like nice big Twinkies, and it works. There's Intervale. So this is just, and probably you're on the loader. So you think? So it's coming right down the windrow, sometimes with materials like this. And I use this one because it's just such a good example. The Intervale put dams down the windrow, because you have a 100-foot windrow. If you drop that liquid, it's really difficult to pick up. So we never should be thinking about dropping any liquids on the ground. We always have to have a bowl or a base or something to put those down before we pick the stuff up with our loaders. That happens. So then they would put the tanker truck puts the liquids in there, and then if it's like blood or something like that, that I'm not gonna run a windrow turner through, then I'm just gonna fill in those trenches and let that work its way through, because blood is gonna be more smelly than milk waste, probably. And we just wanna make sure that we're not liberating odors. It's not okay to liberate lots of odors. And as soon as the carbon, like you have the wood pellets, whatever, as soon as the carbon touch the ammonia and the carbon get together, it takes care of it. Carbon scrubs the odor. And we just have to do that. When we're coming into a 2 million bird farm, it stinks, it's horrible. As soon as we put carbon over everything, make a carbon tunnel over everything, the odor is gone. The flies are gone. So it works. Basically what's happening in this, it's all done, I prefer to do it all in static piles, no turning, set it, forget it. If we do that and we have that chunky carbon, then it works by itself and we don't have to do any turning. We don't have to think about the loader or liberating odors, using more diesel, all that kind of stuff. We really don't have to do that. In the avian influenza breaks, and this got started for the wrong reason, but when we were in 2015, when we had our first outbreak, we were composting in-house, so under-house, but you can't always do that in layer houses. And then we were moving it outside after 2 weeks, after it reached its temperatures and after 2 weeks. Then fast forward to 2022, when we had our second outbreak in the United States, and it's still going on. They decided that in 2 weeks they were composting outdoors because we had a lot more layer operations that were involved, and they all have cages and stuff that you can't work around. So we ended up having piles outside, and we try to keep them as close as possible to the farms because we don't want, it's an airborne disease spread, and we don't want that stuff moved as much as possible. Also, doesn't help when we turn it and liberate some of that stuff. So 2 weeks, they're actually putting windrow turners through it after it's reached temperature. It hasn't reached temperature, it could be there for 2, 3, 4, 6 months. And then they'll go ahead and do a turn. And it helps to make sure the virus is taken care of. However, it probably takes 10 minutes of 133 to neutralize that virus. It just has to happen throughout the whole pile, and we kind of know that part. But it really is an easy virus to kill. This is flaxseed, and we're doing it similarly to what Intervale did, but we just sort of made a little trench on the side of this windrow. This is at Eco Verde in Akron, New York, so way west New York. And they ended up getting, they called me one day and said, we got 180 6-gallon buckets of this stuff. And they want us to take it, and they're willing to pay a tipping fee. We're like, okay. So I said, take it. I said, I'll drive out and help you incorporate. We'll get it going. And they did, and beautiful material, and it's flaxseed. So it's got lots of nutritive value, lots of protein, so really good stuff. And we were able to do all of those buckets in there and reuse the buckets afterwards, so. I'm also working with cannabis waste disposal. So New York State DEC said, Jean, you can do this. And so they said, we need to make it irretrievable. And so I said, okay, well, I think we're gonna compost it. That's what I think. We could digest it. It's possible to digest, but it's not gonna take care of all the THC or any residual THC that might be there or whatever. So, so composting is my preferred method. We do some direct incorporation in the soil, so some of the stem and some of that stuff. There isn't any THC left in there, but apparently the the THC in a lot of this material is like 20, 30 times what it was when people first started smoking. So it's strong. So we're being more careful. So what we may have smoked as children is different. It's different. I'm not allowed to talk about this though. We'll lose our federal funding, Cornell, so I'm not really supposed to strike that from that. But anyway, so I'm supposed to make it irretrievable. So we're basically doing some chipping, some blending. This is a cannabis farm that was actually using some Korean farming methods. So it's an aerated static pile basically. And we did it a couple of different ways with them. They also were making bokashi, so we incorporated that into some of their compost. And they have a couple of greenhouses. This particular farm has a couple of greenhouses, but it also has a lot of organic crops. So it's an organic farm that's growing other things besides cannabis. So they really wanted to get everything into that circular loop, and the cannabis waste generally would go out onto food crops, not back into the cannabis yet. We might get it there, but we're working on we're doing a lot of work with figuring out the soils that it needs to be grown in, because the soils are so strict. If you smoke through a heavy metal, then I guess it would hurt our brains more than normal, something like that. So, I know little about all this stuff, but I know how to compost it. So we're doing a lot of different things. They were also taking coffee grounds and other things, some food waste and stuff from some other places. There's also liquids, so the liquid extracts, and that is at Eco Verde, also that picture, and the growers brought the extract in the liquids in just a 4x4x4 container, and they put it into that volcano area. So they're also blending. Did bring a blender and sometimes feed batch mixers. Some of the feed batch mixers that we use on farms and some of the mixers, blenders can do a great job with incorporating liquids so that we're not losing the liquids. We don't ever want to lose those. Some of the bokashi, dumping that into the bin so that it could be mixed in. More cannabis liquids. So there's a lot, and I walked onto a farm that had a 30-yard dumpster of extracted bud. And I was like, okay, I always knew it as an apple orchard, but they changed a little bit, or added a little bit. So some of that, hey, the videos are working, look at that. Okay, I think that's it. I do a lot of butcher waste, and butcher waste is a serious issue for all of us right now. Some of the fees for removing butcher waste pickups in the North Country and in Western New York, and I know Vermont has a lot of trouble because I looked over here on it. Some of it went from $170 a pickup, and it doesn't matter how many barrels you have, but $170 a pickup to $700
Wow.
for some of our butchers because of the rural nature of most of our butchers. We're not the centralized, everybody's in one place, we can just pick you up 1, 2, 3. These guys are paying large fees. And the same thing is happening in Vermont. I know Vermont's having as much trouble as New York with all of this. And we have a zero tolerance for pentobarbital, which is a euthanasia drug. And the USDA has put that through because too many of our lazy dogs probably weren't lazy, they were just drugged, because it was getting into the pet food, basically. It doesn't get into our food, but it gets into the pet food, and you think, oh, that dog just lays there all the time, and it probably has a little bit of barbiturate therapy. So that is a zero tolerance all across the nation, and we're having more trouble getting rid of some of these materials because of that.
Which livestock was getting more nutrients?
Which what
Which livestock?
are euthanized?
Yeah.
All of them are
Barbiturates.
All of them are euthanized with pentobarbital, which is,
Okay.
it's pretty much the standard.
Yeah, I can tell you
Any
that.
animal.
When
Go
it's
into
meat
the
market
brain.
plant, yeah.
They're not, yes. That would be okay. The mechanical is good. Chemical is what people are really doing, and a lot of people, there's greater population density, so you can't always shoot that cow.
Okay, gotcha.
And you don't want to shoot that baby calf, or you don't, so we euthanize them. The young animals, we do tend to euthanizing, just because. I was on a large brucellosis outbreak, not a large, but like 700 animals that had to be composted. And the babies were just chemically euthanized. Everybody else was captive bolt. And yeah, so we're not going to talk about depopulation right now. That's a different subject. Anyway, so butcher waste compost really well. I think Brian Jaros and myself and Carrie Oceans, a couple of us were in the same meeting at one point. We're like, can we compost this stuff? Can we compost dead stock? We think we can do it. And push came to shove, and we developed methodology and stuff like that because we did lose a lot of our rendering. Even though we still have some now, we've lost like huge amounts. Mostly, and most of that happened because of that huge bubble. We were feeding cows to cows and chickens to chickens, and neither of them are meat eaters. They need protein, but neither of them are meat eaters, so their stomachs really aren't designed to do that kind of stuff. So that the whole market sort of went away, and we're like, well, what do we do with it now? So, Hurricane Florence, we had barns that were filled with liquid bird, basically. You know, this much, there are curbs around all of those barns so that they don't let leachate out. And we just had to pump some of these things out. This video might work, let me see. Yeah.
I bet that was.
No, so we sucked it up into with a tanker, into a tanker, and then canted it in here. And I think I put 80,000 gallons in that volcano. And then what we do is let it soak in, and I think there's maybe another one that will work. This guy was working the tank, and then there was a loader that was pushing the liquids down so that we could get it out. Either that or we filled those barns with carbon and then pulled it all back out. So those were the methodologies we were doing, but we had so many farms and so many bad flies and mosquitoes and everything from that. And we weren't allowed to get into North Carolina, this is 2019, we weren't allowed to get into North Carolina for 2 weeks because we couldn't even land at Raleigh Airport. We had to go into Charlotte and drive over, and there was just too much water in the streets. So there were fish swimming in the streets and stuff there. And we had fish kill, we had a fish farm that went down, that, you know, everything got out. So it was all over. And ocean fish were coming in the wrong direction as well. Yeah, this one should be a video too. There, okay. So we put more carbon in there just to get it to absorb in, to soak in. It can be hydrophobic, as we all know, composters, things can get too dry.
What kind of carbon are you putting in there?
This was all shavings. That's all we could get down there. And like, we just couldn't get anything there because everything had been underwater. And mostly all the pigs went to the landfill. So the pigs that died were just sent to the landfill. They just couldn't deal with that much. But the chickens, we couldn't do that, especially because so much of it was liquefied. And we were able to just put it into volcanoes or put carbon into the barns and pull it back out. So, food waste, I think we threw that one in there for something. We're doing a lot of food waste, but you guys know about that stuff. This is actually depopulation foam, so that foam becomes a liquid, and we have to compost those birds that are underneath there. And I know this video won't work, but a Hooterite farmer actually took this with his phone So I was, no.
So that's when they have to
doesn't
kill
work.
off the entire barn at once? Is that right?
That's a foam depopulation.
Yeah.
What's the
So
foam?
it's,
Sorry, what's the foam?
nitrogen. It's the nitrogen bubbles get just trapped in their throat and they asphyxiate basically. So it's actually very fast, surprisingly, but those were turkeys and we had all different sizes of turkeys from large to small. But we also have to deal with all that liquid and wet birds at that point, which actually works pretty well once everything dissipates, the foam dissipates.
Bubble tea.
So eggs, I'm writing a standard operating procedure for disposing of the high-path avian influenza eggs. We've been doing it for a while because we have to, but new people come in, new subject matter experts come in. And is anybody a subject matter expert in here for HPAI? Okay. I know there are a couple people in Vermont that are. I think one works for DEC. But I don't know if he's still there, but he was trained at one point. So we have to deal with the eggs, and some of the eggs are already crated and on pallets and all that. So 720 dozen eggs, or dozen eggs, 8,640 eggs per pallet. And we had 100, so I hooked up a chain to this part, to that, took the plastic off of it, and then we threw all the cardboard and eggs onto the floor there and mixed it in with the manure, carbon. We always are gonna bring carbon in. In that particular farm, we had 1.2 million birds. We had 180 tractor trailer loads full of wood chips brought into that farm. So, and I don't even think that totally took care of all of it, because when I left, everything was incorporated, but then when they do a turn, then they've got to sometimes they bring more in. So, anyway, so we're cracking the eggs as best we can, and then getting them out into windrows. Sometimes we have a lot of liquid egg. You don't really know this, but there's always liquid egg on a farm. When egg shells are thin, eggs break and they drop down, so they always have a wheelbarrow underneath the belt, the egg belt, so that anything that's liquid is going to go down into that. So you've got all these pockets of liquid egg all over a farm anyway. And like our farms right now, our farms in New York actually sell it. So it can go into animal feed. So if they have it and they keep it into clean, they put it into clean containment, it goes to actually to Canada and is added into feed because it's good protein and calcium still. So we do as much scavenging, salvaging in any of these situations as we can, but boy, are we ever throwing away a lot of meat. But hopefully it gets back into these places. This is, I'm up there again. This was 16 feet tall, so that wall there is 16 feet tall. And I'm up to the top of it there. But I'm standing on all birds, manure, and carbon. There were no eggs in it by that point. We also do 1 million pounds of, I don't know why there's no color when it goes through this thing. It's another screwy thing. But it's got color on my screen. Those are red blood fish. Oh. So I'm looking at it, I was like, boy, that's a bad picture. We do 1 million pounds of fish from 1 million pounds of fish from Lake Ontario fisheries. So we have fish cleaning stations. It's a tourist thing. Fishermen come up, they get their fish cleaned. We keep the guts. The guts go all to a couple of different places. So there are a couple of places that they can go to, but a lot of it goes to Bristol Hill landfill. I live on Lake Ontario. So it's right off of Lake Ontario fisheries. Erie, the other Great Lakes also have some of this stuff. I don't know what they do actually with a lot of theirs. This was put on paper sludge, but that was a long time ago. Now they're not using the paper sludge. they're just using mostly wood chips. But we developed a method a long time ago to do that, and they collect 1 million pounds a year to do that. So, just a point of information, that's my last slide. But we are going to morph, anybody who knows the Cornell Waste Management Institute, we're going to metamorphosize into New York, CORE, so Center for Organics, Recycling, and Education. And we will have a couple of job openings. We're not growing, well, we are growing, but I will retire at some time. So we're morphing into a different organization, and we will be still doing the same. They've got very succinct marching orders for what people will be continuing to do. So.
Well, thank you, Jean. I could listen to that all day, but we are running short on the allotted time. So, if anybody has questions for Jean, yeah.
Yeah, so if one animal gets sick, they have to kill them all, or how do they?
In an airborne disease outbreak, yes. So if we have HPAI, or if we have, it's not all. Birds in particular will be dispatched. If we have African swine fever, which is in the Dominican Republic right now, and I think they've taken care, I think they're getting it out of there, but if it gets into Haiti, which is right over the hump there, then we're in even worse trouble because the winds come this way. And it can get into the US, and we can have major problems with that. So we're working a lot on that. I mean, USDA APHIS works a lot on that. You can't control the winds, and this is a problem. So once one animal is sick, and only one animal probably brought that outbreak in. So it can be as simple as, at one of those farms, it was as simple as vultures that were sick, that we could see. When I got there, I saw sick vultures already. But they had already killed a couple. But they were sitting on, all they did was sit on top of a house that had 60,000 birds in it. And, one poop or one sneeze or whatever, and that's history. So we really can't keep them alive. We are having some issues with high-path avian influenza morphing over to dairy. Especially, and it's, I should say, not dairy, but milk animals. So milk-producing animals is what it's jumping over to, which I just want to make that distinction because it is a mammal that it's jumping over to, and it's not the beef cows, it's the dairy cows that are having problems with it. It is a different strain, so it's H5, the bird one is H5N1, and the other is H5N5, so it's just a little bit off sequence. But it's definitely a problem that we're looking at. California has a particularly bad issue with it right now, and if you have high-path avian influenza in your dairy, you will have all dead cats. The cats are all the cats on the farm are dying because they get into the milk, and that's that. They're small enough, and some of it is having to do with size. The cows are getting through the virus, so they're getting better, but we don't know at this point whether they'll return back to the production that they would be able to, after they get through the flu, will they be able to produce next time around? With the next calf or not, or does this wipe them out and just 3 strikes, So we really don't know that yet.
So when you're taking liquids, you make the bowl with your carbon, pour the liquid into it. You don't see any seepage coming out of that?
No. We're making a big bowl. Those bowls, and we do them with bobcats. So I'll have somebody just circle around, and keep pushing that carbon in. If it does leak, then you've put too much in. So we really are doing it very slowly. But like I said, I think we got 60,000 gallons of liquid bird into that one big volcano, and it was probably, you know, these tables, the circle of these tables.
And you said that was like 1,800 yards of
Huh?
carbon? 1,800 yards of carbon?
I don't know how many yards of carbon it was. We just keep circling around and doing it. Doing it in a window makes it a little bit more organized, so we can kind of tell that. But this material was going to be moved about 6 miles down a road to a field that was appropriate to put it on and to build all the windrows. So we took like 4 farms and figured out what fields could be used and brought all of their material out to one area that we were able to stack it in.
So you don't have an equation of like 1 gallon of liquid to a yard of carbon?
I don't have it for liquids. We do have it for tissue density. So we'll take, and I'm working even a little bit more on that because of some of the human composting, but we have to be exact. So how much is enough? We don't want too much because then we have to deal with all of that medium, but we have to have enough that that chimney effect is going to work inside of a container. And that's what I'm working on right now. That's the research that we're doing right now is just putting animals in rough cut lumber wooden boxes, which is not what's being done anyplace else. They're using these, I equate it to a freezer. You know, it's like a chest freezer. And the body is put in, carbon's put underneath, body's put in, and there's an air intake and an exhaust. But they're like $10,000 boxes, and New York says we're not allowed to reuse our boxes. So, and because of DNA, it's a DNA thing, and the State Department gets involved. When it's humans, it's like the State Department, funerals, and cemeteries. Those are who we're working with right now. And I don't do this through Cornell, because I'm not filling out that kind of paperwork. It's not happening.
I'll do some compostable boxes for you.
What's happening?
Just a note, I'm not sure how many folks are aware of this, but I think Vermont was the first state to allow natural burial. So while human composting makes total sense in big urban areas, Vermont is really set up for doing natural burial. And there's the first natural burial devoted just to first cemetery devoted just to natural burial is right in Roxbury, Vermont Forest Cemetery. I encourage anybody to go to their website and look into it. It's an amazing thing they're doing there, and the woman of the couple that are running it as a nonprofit were responsible for getting the law changed here in Vermont so that you don't have to be 6 feet down. You don't, and it's quite an extraordinary process. So it's composting, it's in situ composting. I guess.
Are they doing shallow burial? Are they doing the shallow burial?
Yeah, it has to be exposed to the microbes, right?
Right,
So,
right, and it's the only, and people are trying to use that for dead stock also. It's still closer than I'm kind of comfortable with for some things. Not for heavy metals, but for pathogens and spore formers.
Yeah.
So spore formers, so I'll tell you a story from New Jersey. There was a bubonic plague outbreak in New Jersey 120, 30 years ago. They buried the pigs, nose to tail, all over this farm, and there were like 600 pigs.
Yeah.
And they put all of them down in the earth, and then 100 years later, somebody comes in to build their McMansion, drills a well, and brings up bubonic plague spores.
Oh.
So any of our anthrax, botulina, plagues, any of that stuff can form spores, and then we never get rid of those.
That same thing is happening where permafrost is melting.
Yep.
In Siberia or somewhere there, where these animals had died of bubonic plague and were naturally buried, I don't know, thousands of years ago.
Right.
are now being exposed and causing outbreaks. So it's pretty extraordinary that these spores can last.
Oh, thousands.
Endospores, they're very thermostable.
Yeah.
These are
What's
the
that?
things when you're canning
Well, they're
things, you're
not-
trying to,
They're not
kill all the
thermos, if we reach our compost temperatures, we don't have any problems. But our, like, even the avian influenza can last in a puddle for months. It loves 54 degrees Fahrenheit. It's very happy at that temperature, and that's why we have these outbreaks in the spring,
They're very
and then we get into the,
spores that allow them to survive for,
yeah.
decades and decades.
The heat will kill them generally, even with botulina.
If you get it hot enough.
You get it hot enough, you get it to a boiling point and stuff like that, and our compost temperatures will do that. We'll take care of the spores because of the time and temperature. So it's the length, the duration of that. It's not 212, but it's 133, 160. We don't want to hit the 212 or else we have a fire, in the pile and stuff like that. So we're looking at that, and we look at all of this stuff. We did a pretty in-depth study when we did all of our roadkill research. DOT gave us $500,000, and we answered every dairy question that we could, every poultry. We just seeded stuff into the piles, into the carcasses, and pulled it back out. So if anybody needs really in-depth biology on that stuff, that would be a good place to do it, because we had the veterinarians, because I'm not a veterinarian. So we had the veterinarians say, okay, what about this, what about this, what about this? This is a problem. What happens with, most people were worried about rabies and TB, and those tend to be very weak. So that's not the problem, but when we get to botulina and some of the other ones, those are much more of a problem.
Anthrax, again, that same group.
Yeah. You talk to the botulina in swamps and stuff where we have poultry kills, or duck kills and stuff like that, geese kills, because the botulina, the water levels go up and down, and when the botulina spores are exposed, the birds will eat them, and then all of a sudden we have these birds that have necks hanging over, and we realize that that's what
I
happens.
guess the other thing with the depth I worry about is just flooding events, and we're
Yeah.
putting it on the
Yeah.
landscape.
Yeah, well, and we're talking, Vermont,
Yeah,
Vermont floods a little bit too much.
just had too much.
So, yeah. So it's these things that I worry about. So I'm not as, I'm trying to make sure that people understand the difference between natural burial and composting of humans, because we went to those cement boxes and everything because of water, because of groundwater and surface water. And that's why we ended up there. I don't think that's where we should be. I don't want to be in a box and be mummified, in perpetuity. That's not what should happen. But I really do want to make sure that we understand the differences, that we make those choices. And if it's a really good place to do it, go for it. And I do have people that are planting trees with people. So a person per tree or a family per tree, so that a lot of stuff is taken up. And that can be their area. It may not be their forever area. That's the only thing. So.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you, Jean.
Yeah.